Those of you who have been with me for some time will have noticed that we never begin our work abruptly. We do not rush into words, nor do we rush into instruction. We always begin with a pause, and the reason for this is very simple, though it takes a lifetime to understand it. Without a pause, we are beginning from ourselves. With a pause, we are beginning from God. You see, the world believes that a day begins when the eyes open, when the feet touch the floor, when the mind starts to plan, arrange, remember, and anticipate. But that is not the beginning of a day. That is merely the continuation of yesterday. A new day does not begin with activity. It begins with withdrawal from personal sense, from personal will, from personal responsibility. Scripture tells us, "Be still and know that I am God." It does not say, "Be busy and hope God will help you later." It does not say, "Think it through carefully and then ask God to approve." It says, "Be still." And in that stillness, something is known, not intellectually, not emotionally, but spiritually. In stillness, God is recognized as God. Now, this pause does not have to be long. I have often said that a period of meditation may be as little as 10 seconds. 10 seconds in which you do not plan, do not ask, do not affirm, do not deny. 10 seconds in which you simply stop, because the moment you stop, you are no longer asserting that you are the doer, the planner, the sustainer of your life. Without that pause, it is as though we were saying, I will live this day by my own strength. I will meet its demands with my own wisdom. I will solve its problems with my own understanding. And yet, Scripture reminds us, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Vain, not sinful, not evil, but vain, empty, fruitless. So the sacred pause is not a religious exercise. It is an admission of truth. It is the acknowledgement that life is already being lived by God, sustained by God, governed by God. When we pause, we are not inviting God into the day. God is already there. We are withdrawing our interference. In that pause, there is a quiet recognition. I am not beginning this day alone. The sun did not wait for my permission to rise. The breath did not ask my consent to flow. The earth did not consult my plans before turning on its axis. All of this is already in motion by divine law, divine intelligence, divine grace. And so, in that moment of stillness, the heart whispers, sometimes without words, Father, not as a title, not as a doctrine, but as relationship. Father, this is not my day to manage. This is not my life to struggle through. This is thy day, already complete in thee. The psalmist tells us, this is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Notice it does not say, this is the day I must fix, improve, or defend. It is the Lord's day. And the only thing asked of us is recognition. Now, when we take this pause, something very subtle takes place within us. The will relaxes. The mind loosens its grip. The burden of self-responsibility begins, even if only slightly, to lift. And in that lifting, there is room for grace, room for guidance, room for that presence which has been waiting patiently for us to stop talking long enough to hear. Elijah did not find God in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the still, small voice. And that voice is not heard over the noise of planning, worrying, and rushing. It is heard only when we pause, only when we dare, even briefly, to do nothing. This is why we begin here, not because stillness is an end in itself, but because without stillness, there is no beginning at all. Without the sacred pause, we are merely repeating yesterday's patterns under the illusion of a new morning. With the pause, we are stepping out of time and into eternity, out of personal sense and into divine consciousness. And so, before a single word is spoken, before a single task is undertaken, before a single problem is anticipated, we pause. We acknowledge quietly and inwardly that the government of this day does not rest upon our shoulders. The Lord shall fight for you, Scripture says, and ye shall hold your peace. That peace begins now, in the pause, in the stillness, in the sacred moment where human will steps aside and divine order is allowed to appear. Now, having entered this sacred pause, something further must take place if the pause is to be fruitful. It is not enough merely to stop for a moment and then resume life as usual. The pause is the doorway. What we do next determines whether we remain in personal sense or step into spiritual consciousness. And what we do next is this: we relinquish ownership of the day. Most people live as though each day were a possession. My day, my responsibilities, my problems, my future. From that sense of ownership comes strain, fear, and exhaustion. Ownership implies burden. Ownership implies maintenance. Ownership implies the constant anxiety of keeping things from falling apart. But the spiritual life begins with a different acknowledgement altogether. It begins when, in the quiet of this pause, we say inwardly and sincerely, "Father, this is your day." Now, that is not a phrase to be repeated mechanically. It is not a formula. It is a surrender. It is the laying down of the belief that the outcome of this day depends upon our personal skill, effort, or foresight. It is the recognition that the day was already complete in God before we ever awoke to it. Scripture tells us, "Known unto God are all his works from the beginning of the world." If that is true, and it is, then nothing that will occur this day is unknown to God. Nothing will surprise God. Nothing will catch God unprepared. And if that is so, then what really are we holding on to? When we say, "Father, this is your day," we are not asking God to take over later. We are acknowledging that God never relinquished control in the first place. We are simply ceasing to interfere. You see, human sense believes that if we do not plan carefully, control firmly, and worry sufficiently, things will go wrong. But the spiritual sense knows something else entirely. It knows that the sun rises without our anxiety, the tides move without our supervision, and the heart beats without our instruction. Life is already governed. Jesus made this clear when he said, "Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink." He was not encouraging irresponsibility. He was revealing reality. He was pointing out that the Father already knows what things we have need of before we ask. So in this moment of relinquishment, we are not becoming passive. We are becoming receptive. We are opening the door of consciousness to divine activity. We are saying, in effect, "I consent to let thy will be done, not as an ideal, not as a hope, but as a present fact." This yielding is gentle. It is not dramatic. There is no struggle involved. We are not fighting the ego or suppressing thought. We are simply stepping back. And as we step back, something steps forward, not something new, but something eternal. Commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Notice again, the bringing to pass is not assigned to us. Our part is commitment and trust. God's part is fulfillment. Now, when we truly relinquish ownership of the day, we begin to feel a subtle shift within us. The tightness eases. The sense of urgency softens. The mind becomes less insistent on knowing how everything will work out. We no longer feel compelled to carry the weight of tomorrow into this moment. And in that release, we may quietly say, Father, use me this day. Not use me according to my ambitions, my fears, or my plans, but use me as thy instrument. Let me be where I am needed. Let me speak what is required. Let me do what is appointed without strain, without self-importance, without resistance. This is the meaning of true obedience, not blind following, but conscious yielding. It is what the Master meant when he said, I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father which hath sent me. He was not denying his individuality. He was discovering its divine source. When we relinquish the day in this way, we are no longer living ahead of ourselves. We are no longer attempting to outrun grace or anticipate divine action. We are allowing the day to unfold as revelation rather than as a problem to be solved. And so we stand here quietly, inwardly, having paused, having yielded, having released ownership. We are no longer saying, what must I do today? We are listening for what is already being done through us. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. Not later, now, this very moment. And in this surrender, the day begins not as a burden, but as a benediction. Now, as we have paused, and as we have relinquished ownership of the day, there is a further unfolding that must take place if this morning dedication is to be complete. For it is one thing to give the day to God, and it is another thing to understand who it is that God is living as. Most of the strain of human life comes from a false sense of identity. We awaken in the morning believing ourselves to be isolated beings, separate minds and separate bodies, facing a world that is largely indifferent or even hostile. From that belief comes fear, ambition, competition, and the endless attempt to protect and improve a personal self. But the spiritual life begins at the moment we question that assumption. Scripture does not tell us that we are separated from God and must struggle to return. It tells us something far more radical and far more comforting. It tells us in him we live and move and have our being. If that is true, and it is, then there has never been a moment when we were outside of God, nor a moment when God was absent from us. Now, this realization does not come through reasoning. It comes through remembrance. It is a recognition that dawns gently as personal sense yields. And so, in this quiet hour, we let go of the belief that we are merely human beings trying to become spiritual, and we begin to glimpse the truth that we are spiritual beings appearing human. Jesus expressed this in the simplest and most revolutionary of statements. I and my Father are one. He did not say this to exalt himself above others. He said it to reveal the nature of sonship. And lest anyone misunderstand, he added, is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods, sons and daughters of the Most High, not by effort, not by attainment, but by divine fact. Now, when we speak of sonship, we are not speaking of a personal relationship in the human sense. We are speaking of consciousness. Sonship is the awareness that the life we are living is not self-originated. It is derived. It flows. It is sustained by an infinite source. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. This is not poetry. This is not metaphor. This is a statement of spiritual law. To the degree that we accept it, rely upon it, and live from it, to that degree it becomes our experience. So in this morning dedication, we allow that truth to settle within us. We do not argue with it. We do not try to feel worthy of it. We simply acknowledge it. God formed us in the womb. God knew us before our name was spoken. God has never lost sight of us, not for a moment. The psalmist says, "If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me." There is no place we can go where God is not already present. There is no condition we can enter where divine care does not already exist. And so, as this realization dawns, something else fades away. The sense of being a little self-facing big problems begins to dissolve. We are no longer trying to face life from the standpoint of personal capacity. We are beginning to live from the standpoint of divine relationship. This is why Jesus could say, "The Son can do nothing of himself." That was not weakness. That was strength. It was the recognition that the power was not in the personal sense of self, but in the Father within. And then he added, "The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." This is the transition we are allowing to take place now. We are no longer saying, "I must live this day." We are saying, "The Father lives this day as me." We are no longer asking, "How shall I manage?" We are resting in the assurance that divine intelligence is already functioning where we are. And this recognition brings with it a great peace. Not the peace of knowing outcomes, but the peace of knowing presence. Not the peace of control, but the peace of trust. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Stayed, not occasionally turned toward, not desperately clinging to, but quietly resting in. As this sonship consciousness settles in, there is no excitement, no emotional high. There is simply a deep inner assurance, a feeling of being accompanied, a knowing that we are not alone in this life, not now, not ever. And from this awareness, the day unfolds differently. We listen more. We react less. We move when moved, speak when spoken through, act when acted through. We are no longer attempting to become something. We are allowing what already is to express itself. This is the meaning of true humility. Not self-denial, but self-discovery. Not becoming less, but allowing God to be more visible as us. And so we rest here for a moment in this recognition of sonship before the next unfolding takes place. Now, having come into this awareness of sonship, this recognition that we are not living apart from God, but as an expression of God, there naturally arises the question of how we are to nourish and sustain this awareness throughout the day. And it is here that Scripture assumes its true and rightful place in the spiritual life. Scripture was never meant to be a book of quotations to be used in moments of distress, nor a collection of verses to be memorized for comfort or argument. Scripture is the record of spiritual realization, and its purpose is not to inform the intellect, but to awaken consciousness. When we turn to Scripture in this morning hour, we are not seeking something new. We are allowing truth to remind us of what already is. As the Master said, "It is the Spirit that quickeneth, the flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life." That is the key. Scripture becomes living only when it is received spiritually, when it is read silently, reverently, without haste, and without the desire to use it for some personal end. We are not trying to make Scripture work for us. We are letting Scripture work in us. I have often suggested that students keep close at hand a New Testament, preferably a red-letter edition, so that the words spoken by the Master may become familiar, not as language, but as atmosphere. It is not that we memorize these words. It is that through repeated exposure, they become woven into the fabric of our consciousness. You see, truth does not need repetition because God has not heard us. Truth is repeated because we have not yet heard it. And even then, vain repetition is of no value. What is of value is quiet acceptance. So in this morning dedication, we may allow a single passage to come to us, not one chosen by the mind, but one that rises naturally into awareness. Perhaps it is, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," or "My grace is sufficient for thee," or "Son, thou art ever with me." We do not argue with these words. We do not attempt to apply them to specific situations. We simply let them be present, as one would let light be present in a darkened room. Light does not argue with darkness. It dispels it by being itself. In this way, Scripture ceases to be external authority and becomes inner assurance. It is no longer something we turn to, it is something we live with. And throughout the day, when challenges arise, that truth is already there, not remembered, but active. The psalmist writes, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." Notice it does not say a map. It is not revealing the whole journey in advance. It is illuminating the step that is needed now, and that is all that is ever required. As we abide in Scripture in this way, something very gentle but very profound takes place. Fear loses its argument. Anxiety loses its voice. We are not trying to overcome these things. They simply find no place to stand. For where the Word is consciously present, there is authority, not human authority, but divine law. Jesus said, "If ye abide in my word, and my word abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you." But notice again, the emphasis is not on asking. The emphasis is on abiding. Asking becomes secondary, almost unnecessary, when consciousness is aligned with truth. And so, Scripture becomes companion rather than crutch. It walks with us. It steadies us. It reminds us not of what we must do, but of what God is already doing. In this way, the morning dedication is carried into the day without effort, not by repeating words, but by resting in the consciousness those words have awakened. And now, having allowed Scripture to take its rightful place, not as letter, but as living presence, we are ready for the next deepening, the inner humbling that makes room for grace. Now we come to a point in this morning dedication that is often misunderstood, and yet it is the very heart of the spiritual life. It is the point at which we discover that grace does not enter where the self is still asserting its own sufficiency. Grace does not compete. Grace waits. Humility, as it is commonly understood, is often mistaken for self-belittlement or weakness. But spiritual humility has nothing to do with thinking less of oneself. It has everything to do with thinking less from oneself. It is the recognition that the personal mind, however educated, sincere, or well-intentioned, is not the source of wisdom, love, or power. Jesus stated this with complete clarity when he said, "I can of mine own self do nothing." That was not confession. It was revelation. It was the acknowledgement that the human sense of self is not the origin of life, intelligence, or action. The origin is God, and the function of the human self is receptivity. So in this quiet hour, we allow ourselves to be humbled not by circumstances, not by failure, not by struggle, but by truth. We gently admit, inwardly and without shame, "Father, I need thy wisdom today, not my limited understanding. I need thy love, not my personal affection. I need thy strength, not my human will." This admission does not weaken us. It frees us. It releases us from the impossible burden of trying to be the source of our own good. Scripture tells us every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. If that is true, and it is, then no amount of striving can produce what is already being given. Humbling of spirit is simply the willingness to stop pretending otherwise. And so, in this moment, we are not asking God to give us grace. Grace is already present. We are making room for it. We are emptying the vessel of self-sufficiency so that the fullness of divine sufficiency may be experienced. The Master taught, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Poor in spirit does not mean lacking faith or confidence. It means empty of self-assertion, empty of the belief that I must make life work. And it is to such emptiness that the kingdom is revealed. As this humbling takes place, there is often a great sense of relief. The pressure to know, to decide, to anticipate begins to dissolve. We are no longer demanding that the future be revealed to us. We are content to let grace meet us moment by moment. Thy grace is sufficient for thee, Paul tells us. Not sufficient tomorrow. Not sufficient if circumstances improve. Sufficient now. Grace is not something we accumulate. It is something we rest in. And when we rest in grace, we discover that it expresses itself as wisdom when wisdom is needed, as love when love is required, as strength when strength is demanded. Grace takes the form necessary to the moment. We do not direct it. We do not outline its duties. We trust it. This is the emptying that allows the imprisoned splendor to escape. That splendor has always been within us, but it cannot flow freely while we are crowded with opinions, fears, plans, and personal judgments. When these are gently laid aside, not fought, not denied, but released, the presence reveals itself naturally. And so, in this humbling, we find ourselves quietly saying, "Father, without thee, I can do nothing, but with thee, all things are possible," not as a doctrine, but as lived reality. There is no drama here, no sense of loss, only a deep, abiding peace. A peace that comes from knowing that life is not resting on our shoulders, but on God's everlasting arms. And now, having been humbled, not crushed, but freed, we are ready to meet the day's demands before they ever appear. Now, having entered this state of humility, this emptying of self-sufficiency, we come to one of the great practical revelations of the spiritual life. We discover that we do not wait for problems to appear before we turn to God. We do not face the day armed with fear or preparation for conflict. We meet the day before it arrives in consciousness. Most people spend their lives reacting. They wait until a demand presents itself and then attempt to rise to meet it with whatever strength, wisdom, or resources they can muster. And when those resources seem insufficient, fear enters, followed by struggle. But the spiritual way is different. We do not wait for the appearance of a problem to acknowledge God. We begin the day by recognizing that whatever the day contains, known or unknown grace is already present to meet it. Jesus never waited for the multitudes to be fed before recognizing supply. He did not look first at the lack. He looked at what was present and gave thanks. He understood that divine supply precedes human need. Before they call, I will answer, the scripture tells us. That is not poetry, it is law. So, in this morning dedication, we are not attempting to foresee the challenges of the day. We are not reviewing our calendar with anxiety. We are resting in the assurance that nothing can arise in our experience, that the presence within us is not already sufficient to meet. Perhaps there are demands today that seem beyond our understanding. Perhaps there are responsibilities that appear too great, situations too complex, or resources too limited. But in this quiet hour, we remember, he that is within me is greater than he that is in the world, greater than conditions, greater than appearances, greater than human calculation. We may quietly acknowledge, Father, there may be tasks today beyond my strength, beyond my wisdom, beyond my financial capacity, and therefore I do not rely on myself. I rely on Thee. That reliance is not resignation, it is confidence. Confidence not in personal ability, but in divine law. The psalmist assures us, the Lord shall perfect that which concerneth me. Not I shall perfect it. The Lord shall. And if that is so, then our work is not to make things happen, but to remain receptive to what is already unfolding. This is why we do not carry fear into the day. Fear assumes that we will be left alone to face circumstances. Faith knows that we are never alone. Faith is not optimism. It is awareness. And so, as we sit here, we let go of every anxious projection into the future. We do not rehearse conversations. We do not anticipate failures. We do not plan defenses. We simply rest in the consciousness of divine adequacy. When Moses stood before the Red Sea, he did not know how deliverance would appear, but deliverance was already present. When David faced Goliath, the outcome was already determined not by strength, but by reliance. When Daniel entered the lion's den, protection was not created in that moment. It was revealed. So it is with us. Whatever form today's demands may take, they do not arrive without provision. Grace does not follow need. Grace precedes it. And our recognition of that truth allows us to meet the day calmly, alertly, without tension. There is a great difference between preparedness and anxiety. Preparedness is spiritual awareness. Anxiety is personal forecasting. One rests in God, the other struggles in thought. And so, in this moment, we let the day be what it will be. We are not careless. We are confident. Confident that divine intelligence goes before us, making the crooked places straight, opening doors no man can shut, and closing doors no man should enter. We rise from this morning dedication not armed for battle, but clothed in assurance. We do not say, I hope I can handle today. We say quietly and inwardly, Thy grace is my sufficiency in all things, and that is enough. Now, we must be very clear on this point, for here many sincere students stumble. The morning dedication is not an isolated act. It is not something we do once and then leave behind as we rush into the activities of the day. The morning pause opens the door, but it is abiding that keeps the door open. Jesus did not say, visit the Word. He said, abide in me and I in you. Abiding is continuous awareness. It is not strain. It is remembrance. It is the gentle inward turning that says again and again, I am not alone in this moment. Most people believe that meditation is something done with closed eyes in a quiet room, but the true meditation is lived with open eyes in the marketplace, in the office, in the home, in conversation, and even in conflict. The meditation that does not follow us into daily living has not yet fulfilled its purpose. Paul tells us, pray without ceasing. He did not mean that we are to repeat words endlessly throughout the day. He meant that we are to live in unbroken awareness of God. Prayer, in its highest sense, is not speaking, it is listening. And listening can continue while we work, walk, speak, and rest. So throughout the day, we learn the art of the inner pause, not a long pause, often only a second or two, a moment in which we withdraw from reaction and return to awareness, a moment in which we acknowledge the Father is here. Before a decision, we pause. Before a conversation, we pause. Before responding to criticism or praise, we pause. And in that pause, we do not ask questions. We do not plead for guidance. We simply open the inner ear. The psalmist says, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Notice again, it does not say figure it out and then ask God to bless it. It says acknowledge him. Recognition precedes direction. This practice of abiding does not make us slower. It makes us wiser. It does not remove us from activity. It infuses activity with intelligence. We find ourselves saying the right word without planning it, taking the right step without forcing it, being in the right place without arranging it. And as this practice deepens, something very beautiful occurs. We begin to feel companionship, not imagination, not emotion, but presence. A sense that we are not moving through the day alone, but that something within us is moving us. Isaiah tells us, thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, this is the way, walk ye in it. That word is not always audible. More often it is a quiet assurance, a gentle restraint, a subtle impulse, but it is unmistakable when we have learned to listen. Now, do not expect this abiding to be dramatic. It is simple. It is natural. In fact, the more natural it becomes, the less we notice it as something special. It becomes the normal way of living. We do not feel guided, we are guided. We do not feel protected, we are protected. And if at times we forget, if we rush ahead in human will, nothing is lost. There is no punishment. We simply pause again and return. Abiding is not fragile. It does not break because of a moment's forgetfulness. Grace is patient. So we do not condemn ourselves. We do not measure success. We do not keep score. We simply return again and again to the awareness that God is present, God is active, God is living this life as us. And as we practice abiding in this way, the day takes on a different quality. We are less hurried, even when busy, less anxious, even when responsible, less reactive, even when challenged. The outer circumstances may not change immediately, but our relationship to them does. And that is the beginning of true change. Abiding is not an effort to hold on to God. It is the realization that God has never let go of us. Now, as this practice of abiding becomes more natural, we begin to notice a profound change taking place within us, a change so gentle that at first it may escape our attention. We discover that we are no longer living life by doing, but by receiving. And this transition marks a decisive step on the spiritual path. Human sense believes that life is accomplished through effort. It tells us that achievement depends upon striving, that success depends upon pushing forward, and that security depends upon constant vigilance. From this belief arises tension, fatigue, and the persistent fear of falling short. But the spiritual life reveals something entirely different. It shows us that the greatest things in life are not achieved, they are received. Grace cannot be earned. Guidance cannot be forced. Love cannot be manufactured. These things appear only when the self steps aside. Jesus illustrated this again and again. He did not strain to heal. He did not wrestle with disease. He did not argue with lack. He simply recognized the presence of the Father and allowed that presence to act. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. There is no effort in that statement, only trust. So as we move through the day, abiding in this awareness, we gradually stop trying to make things happen. We cease pushing against circumstances. We begin to wait not passively, but receptively. Waiting becomes listening. Listening becomes movement. We may notice that decisions arise without strain, actions take place without tension, words are spoken without rehearsal, and often we realize afterward that something has been accomplished through us that we could not have planned. This is the difference between doing and receiving. Doing originates in personal will. Receiving allows divine will to express itself. Doing asks, "What must I accomplish?" Receiving asks nothing at all. It simply yields. Scripture tells us, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord." And again, "Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." A child does not strive to live. A child receives life. A child trusts supply. A child expects care. So, in this stage of our unfolding, we learn to live with childlike trust, not naivety, but spiritual innocence. We are no longer attempting to control outcomes. We are no longer measuring our progress by external results. We are allowing life to reveal itself step by step. This does not mean we become inactive. On the contrary, we may find ourselves more active than ever. But the activity is no longer strained. It flows. It feels guided rather than driven. We are no longer pushing life forward. Life is carrying us. And when something does not move, we do not force it. We pause. We listen. We trust that if it is meant to unfold, it will unfold in its own time and way. And if it is not, no amount of effort could have made it right. This is why Scripture counsels us, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." Salvation is not something we perform. It is something we behold. It is revealed when effort ceases. As this transition from doing to receiving deepens, fear loses its hold. We are no longer afraid of making mistakes because we are not relying on personal judgment alone. We are no longer afraid of failure because we know that even our missteps are gathered up and used by grace. And so, little by little, the day is lived differently. We still act, but we act from inspiration rather than compulsion. We still work, but we work from rest rather than strain. We still plan, but our plans are held lightly, always subject to divine correction. This is the life lived by grace, not a life without movement, but a life without pressure. Not a life without responsibility, but a life without burden. And as we grow accustomed to this way of living, we are ready for an even deeper realization, one that transforms not only how we act, but how we understand who is acting at all. Now we come to a point in our unfolding where words begin to fail us somewhat, not because the truth is obscure, but because it is so simple that the human mind looks for something more complicated. And yet, Paul has given us the clearest description of this state when he says, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. This is not poetry. It is not metaphor. It is a description of consciousness. It is the awareness that while the human self appears to be living, moving, acting, and deciding, the real life is being lived from within by a divine presence. We call this the double life, not two lives competing with one another, but two levels of awareness functioning simultaneously. Outwardly, we appear to be ordinary men and women going about ordinary affairs. We go to work, we care for family, we meet obligations, we engage with the world. Nothing outwardly marks us as unusual. But inwardly, something has changed. There is a presence accompanying every movement, a presence that does not interfere, but guides, does not dominate, but directs, does not shout, but whispers. And this presence is not separate from us. It is the very substance of our being. Jesus lived this double life to the world. He was the carpenter's son, walking dusty roads, eating meals, speaking with fishermen and publicans. But inwardly, he lived entirely by the Father. I do nothing of myself, he said, but as my Father hath taught me, I speak these things. This is the life that gradually unfolds for us as we abide, as we receive, as we relinquish effort. We find that we are no longer initiating life from the personal level. We are responding to inner impulsions. And these impulsions are never hurried, never fearful, never aggressive. They are calm, precise, and quietly authoritative. Now, this does not mean that we become passive or detached from human concerns. On the contrary, we may find ourselves more engaged than before, but our engagement is no longer personal. We are not trying to prove ourselves, protect ourselves, or advance ourselves. We are simply allowing life to express itself as us. And when we come to decisions, we do not force answers. We wait. We listen. Sometimes the guidance comes quickly, sometimes it comes slowly. But when it comes, there is a peace that accompanies it, a peace that says, this is not of human origin. Isaiah tells us, I will guide thee with mine eye. Guidance does not always come as instruction. Often it comes as restraint, a feeling not to go in a certain direction, a quiet closing of a door we thought we wanted to open. And we learn through experience that this restraint is protection. As we live this way, we discover that supply appears without struggle, protection operates without fear, and right relationships form without manipulation. We are no longer attempting to make things happen. We are cooperating with what is already happening. This is why Jesus could say, "Take therefore no thought for the morrow." He was not careless. He was conscious. He knew that the same presence, living the present moment, would be present in the next. Living, I live, yet not I, does not remove us from the world. It frees us within it. We are still here, still human in appearance, still subject to ordinary circumstances, but inwardly we are living by grace, and grace does not fail. There may still be challenges, there may still be moments of uncertainty, but there is no longer a sense of abandonment. We are never facing life alone. The burden has shifted. The responsibility has shifted. The weight of selfhood has been laid down. And gradually, without effort, we begin to realize that life is not something happening to us. It is something happening through us. And when that realization dawns, even partially, the struggle begins to fade. We are not trying to become instruments. We discover that we always were. We are simply consenting now to let the music be heard. Now, when this morning dedication is sincere, when it is not a habit, not a routine, not a religious observance, but a genuine yielding, there follows something that cannot be forced and need not be sought. It is fruitage, and fruitage is never produced by effort. It appears as the natural outcome of right consciousness. Jesus said, "Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit." Notice again, the emphasis is not on striving to bear fruit. The branch does not struggle to produce grapes. The branch abides in the vine, and fruit appears in due season. In exactly the same way, harmony appears in our experience in proportion as we abide in the presence. This fruitage may appear first as peace, not excitement, not elation, but a quiet steadiness of mind, a sense that we are not being tossed about by every circumstance or opinion. We may notice that situations which once disturbed us no longer have the same power, not because we have hardened ourselves, but because we are rooted more deeply. There may also be harmony in the body, not necessarily an instant freedom from every physical discord, but a gradual restoration of balance. The body responds naturally to peace of mind, and peace of mind is the inevitable companion of God awareness. There may be harmony in affairs, supply meeting needs in unexpected ways, relationships adjusting without force, opportunities opening without manipulation. And here we must be very careful not to turn fruitage into a goal. Fruitage is not the reason we practice the presence. It is the evidence that the presence is being practiced. Paul tells us, "The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith." These are not qualities we cultivate by willpower. They are expressions of spirit appearing in human experience. And they appear naturally when the self has been humbled enough to allow spirit to live freely. Now, it must be said, and it must be said honestly, that this way of living does not promise immunity from every discord of human existence. Jesus himself said, "In the world ye shall have tribulation." But he added, "Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Overcoming does not mean avoiding experience. It means passing through experience without losing God awareness. So when challenges do arise, and they will, we are not dismayed. We say, "What of it? We have grace, not only to prevent many problems, but to carry us through those that appear." And often we find that the very challenges which once frightened us now serve to deepen our reliance and strengthen our trust. This is the fruitage of the morning dedication, not a life without movement, but a life without fear, not a life without responsibility, but a life without burden. And gradually, quietly, we begin to see that harmony is not something we achieve. It is something we allow. Now, having come this far, there is nothing more to do. There is no final instruction, no concluding demand, no statement that must be memorized or repeated. There is only recognition, and recognition naturally leads us back into silence. We do not end this dedication by asking for anything. We end it by resting in what already is. Infinity is not something we reach toward. Infinity is embodied within us at this moment. All that the Father hath is mine, Jesus said, and this is as true now as it was then. All spiritual wisdom, all divine grace, all life, all love, these are not outside us waiting to be earned. They are present as consciousness. And when we stop reaching, stop striving, stop seeking to get, we find that we are surrounded by abundance. So we let the words fall away now. We allow the mind to grow quiet, not by force, but by satisfaction. We are not empty. We are full of presence, full of assurance, full of peace. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. That temple is not a building. It is consciousness, and we are dwelling in it now. And now, as we rise from this quiet hour and move into the activities of the day, we do not leave the presence behind. We do not say, now meditation is over and life begins. Life has been here all along, only now it is recognized. We open our eyes, but we do not lose awareness. We stand, but we do not hurry. We move, but we are not driven. The same presence that has been acknowledged in stillness moves with us into action. We do not carry words with us. We carry consciousness. We do not attempt to remember everything that has been said. We trust that what is needed will remain. Truth does not need to be carried. It carries us. And so we enter the day not as those sent out alone, but as those accompanied, not as those trying to live rightly, but as those allowing life to live itself. Quietly, inwardly, we know this is God's day, and God is living it as me. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Follow not because we chase them, but because we are walking in the presence from which they flow. And so we go forward now, not with anxiety, not with expectation, but with trust. Trust in the unseen, the infinite, the ever-present Christ within.